Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track, America's leading Formula One podcast. I'm Brian, that's Rob, and I lost money on the Tyson fight. How you doing, Rob?
Still can't believe you watched that drivel, that pointless drivel. I mean,
I had such high
hey,
hopes,
here's a guy that
such high
isn't a
hopes.
boxer but is young versus a guy that's not far away from drawing his pension. That'll be a good fight, said no one ever.
I had high hopes,
I, I,
and they
we,
were
we, we,
dashed.
we were chatting
Dashed,
before
I
we started
say.
recording, and I don't understand where these high hopes came from. It was never going to be anything other than this. But anyway,
Well, it
we
made
don't
me
talk about
think. It
that. We
made me
talk.
think. I felt like Charles Leclerc.
I am stupid. I am stupid.
Yeah, basically, it was like thinking that someone might beat Max last year. That's the equivalent of.
Yes, that's me. I'm Charlie Brown. Let me go kick that football that Lucy always lets me kick. Anyway,
Anyway, this week we've got bumper. This was set of news. This week was the week that decided it was going to just drop everything for us, which is kind of ironic because it's also the week where we didn't need lots of content because we've got an hour chat with the man, the myth, the legend, Virtual Statman Sean Kelly.
yeah,
So
I'm so excited. This was a great conversation, and like you say, I'm like when we finished recording with Sean, I'm like, this is going to be the best episode in forever. I'm so excited. And then all this news came out. I'm like, we don't need it this week.
we don't need it. It's going to make it a ridiculously long episode. And yeah, when we get to the Sean Kelly thing and I teared up, maybe you've got to listen out for Brian maybe gushing a little bit at one point where he tries to outstat the stat man. And it's just, if I got a lot of grief for my tongue-tied blabbering with Villeneuve, I just want people to pay attention to the later in the section with the Sean when he starts trying to reel off stats. It's, yeah, it's something. Anyway,
It was
so we
amazing.
have
Thank you
we have
again,
news and
Sean. Thank you. Thank you.
social.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. It was amazing. So thank you for doing that. So we got news and social, video vault, chat with Sean, and then we got a Vegas preview because we get back
Yes.
to racing next week. Yeah, baby.
I mean, I'm excited we're done with these 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, 3 weeks on situations, but I'm also really bummed because it's our last 3 weeks on and then the season is finito. So,
Yeah, that is also true. But all good things come to an end, and then we get to look forward to next season, which promises to be even better than this one. So,
yep.
we get to build up to it all over the winter break, and then have a damp squib as one team nails it. And
Is Rob J. Vale being glass half full for the first time in this history of the podcast?
I always am. I'm always an optimist. I mean, it always shoots me down. I'm
No one listening agrees, but okay. Let's get to the news. We got a lot to cover.
no. When have I ever been a pessimist?
Pretty much every episode.
No, that's just when I realize that Ferrari can't do what I want them to do. But who knows next year? It's going to be open. Anyway, yeah, the news. Everybody seemed to be leaving roles this week. It was a
Yes.
week to resign or be fired. And this first one started off as a resigning, but then seemed to quickly snowball into actually I was fired. And um, I'm not great
Niels
with names,
Vittich.
Brian. Yeah, there
Niels
we go.
Vittich. Yep.
Stepped down as race director with immediate effect to pursue new opportunities. And whenever you get one of those new opportunities comes out, then you're kind of thinking, really? You decided you need new opportunities with 3 races left of the season. So Rui Mark, the race director, he will be the race director for Vegas onwards. He's been a marshal, a scrutineer, a steward, a deputy race director, and he was the current race director for F2 and F3. So I'm not sure I'm happy about that choice because it sounds like he's too qualified. We should just pick someone random to promote. But
And like you say, it did turn pretty quickly after about 4 hours or so when the news broke to a lot of people saying, I heard it wasn't so much, quote, step down as it was, quote, fired, sacked, bagged, goodbye, S-canned, pink slipped, see you later, adios.
someone hasn't had to do much sleep after staying up
None.
for Tyson,
I'm
have they?
wired.
Um,
Wired.
Then we also got Paolo Basari left his position as the compliance officer for Formula One's governing body, the FIA. While we were at the FIA, they announced an event next year for 18th of February in London to be a massive car reveal. So it was the first time in F1 history that all teams, principals, drivers will all get together to launch every car livery in small things. It's not that it won't be. We all know it won't be the 2025 cars, and all was looking great. It seemed like a great idea, a
Right.
great event.
Yes.
And then this morning, I read a lot of
Yes, me too.
problems where O2 Arena in London holds 20,000 people. And what they've said was the capacity for this event was going to be 18,000. And I haven't validated this yet, but the tickets that were put on sale to the public seem to have sold out within a nanosecond. And there are rumors swirling that there are only somewhere between 500 to 1,000 made available to the public because everything else is corporate hospitality and pat on the backs for chums of chums of chums. So it's not really an event open to the fans, which crew sucks really badly.
I did see that too. And you know what? I guess we'll find out more in the coming days and weeks, but I did see the same thing. And regardless of how many were made available to the public, the sentiment was no one could get a ticket. Yet they're still arriving on the secondary market for like 3 or 4x, what it was originally. My favorite reaction to this was Max when he heard about it. He said, "Oh, I'm hoping I'll be sick that week."
Oh yeah, he was streaming, wasn't he? He was gaming,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
somebody
Someone put it
broke
in
the news
chat,
to him.
and he's like,
Yeah, yeah,
"Really?"
yeah.
And he goes, "I hope I'm sick that week." That was great. And of other people who won't be showing up on TVs, this time again voluntarily, Damon Hill has been let go by Sky Sports F1. And he tweeted out, "I'll miss the most impressive bunch of professionals that have been my pleasure to have worked with. Looking forward to new challenges." So, I mean, if I'm being honest, Damon Hill is a great champion, great guy, great racer. I'm not sure I'm going to miss him a ton on the coverage. I also don't get all of the non-broadcast Sky Sports F1. Like I get, it cuts off on ESPN, so I don't see him that much anyway. So,
oh yeah,
for Americans, you're not losing a ton of Damon time.
true, and I kind of like him, but I wouldn't say he's the biggest loss to TV broadcast. It's it's a shame he's going, but it's not.
Could we
I
get
agree with you.
Danica to go with him though? Because she adds no value at this point. I was so optimistic for her coverage a year ago or 2 years ago, and it just really has added zero. So, like, if Danica could go with Damon, I'd be all right with that.
More people leaving. Dan Fallows leaves his role as technical director with Aston Martin, but in quotations, will remain with the group. Not, they just giving him some role somewhere. He's just
But
going
I
to
mean,
be
what
the.
was he gonna do? Adrian Newey is coming in. Isn't that going to be Adrian's job?
I doubt it.
What's Adrian going to be? Just special consultant to Lawrence?
Yeah. He's going to be pencil sharpener and doing all the designs and then handing them off to technical director.
So
I bet you.
now he can hire who he wants. He can handpick his person, probably.
Probably. So Dan will just be, I don't know, doing something with an Aston Martin by the sounds of things.
Yep. Greg Maffei will step down as his role as president and chief executive officer of Formula One owner Liberty Media at the end of the year. A lot of people read into this one in terms of why he's leaving and the valuation increase in F1 and what this might mean. I actually think this was also sort of a nothing burger, and I'm guessing he had some clauses in his contract where he gets to cash out based on that value increase. And he's like, yeah, that's good enough. And he probably left, but I don't know.
Terry at Coffee Corner did a nice piece breaking this all down, that apparently the whole Liberty group is being restructured at the moment. And they're bringing, I think, Liberty Media is going to get chopped out into its own entity down to just looking after F1 broadcast and MotoGP if that deal goes through. Because Liberty have got their fingers in many, many, many pies. Right. And they've been this big, huge company. And apparently they're chopping it up into pieces. So like you say, maybe the timing was just right that, hey, if we're doing this reorg, we're chopping it into bits. This is now just going to be a smaller entity that's just going to look after TV services. And hey, the valuation's gone up. Yeah, I'll cash out, thanks. Sure. It would make total sense. Talking to Nothing Burgers, the FIA went to the effort of visiting the Red Bull factory to go and review the case of the front bib adjustment thingy. Apparently conducted an in-depth review and went, yeah, this is a nothing burger. That was on their official FIA. If you look at the FIA document, it says result, nothing burger.
In their standard format at the bottom, it says conclusion, nothing burger.
Nothing burger. So,
and something that is something we saw coming, but finally confirmed, Alpine going to a Merc engine in 2026 and gearbox. So they'll have Mercedes horsepower and I guess electric power and gearbox in 2026. So, viva la France, no more Renault.
I saw quite a mean but maybe fair tweet that said something along the lines of, so now Mercedes can risk being the third best team with their own engine.
After McLaren.
Imagine Alpine come in their package together with the Merc engine beats Merc.
On Williams? I wouldn't sleep on Williams.
Yeah, they got a little bit of catching up to do yet.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so does Alpine. Speaking of catching up, holy cow. Monaco, who we have sat here and discussed as its race tenure, on, off, different sponsors, different television broadcasting, the way it's handled, the threat of them leaving, they extended until 2031. And I know we're about to turn the calendar to 2025. That still feels far out. However, It's not even remotely close to some of the longer agreements that are out there with circuits. And we kind of started looking into this a little bit. And I got on my horse a couple weeks ago when the whole rotation idea came up, and I said if Spa goes into the rotation, I'll be very disappointed. And if Paul Ricard comes back, I'm ending the podcast. So if you look at the 25 circuits whose contracts come up next year, China, Monza, Spa, Zandvoort, Imola, and Mexico. Someone has to go. I mean, there's not going to be a 25th
I could live without
race.
I could live without Mexico and China.
I could too. China, I like China. You don't like the Chinese Grand Prix?
It's okay.
I like that back straight before they kind of turn the corner and come home because it allows a lot of more overtaking opportunities right before you get to the.
There's a lot of straights in Formula One.
I'm also, if I'm being honest, this is maybe I'm gonna get canceled here. I could do, if Imola disappeared, I think I'd be okay. I know, right? Am I dead? Am I done? Was this
Yeah,
my last
I think
episode?
so. I think so. I think we won't be able to record next time because you'll have been cancelled.
If Imola and Zandvoort went into rotation, I could live. Like I could be okay every other year.
Yeah.
But if Spa or Monza goes into rotation, I will find Greg Maffei's replacement, I will say, brother, fix it.
That's it. That's your big speech, brother. Fix it. I'm sure he's going to be
I am-
shaking in his boots when.
I am all show and no go when it comes to that kind of stuff. Anyway, sorry, one more stat that I loved that came out this week that someone found on Reddit. Pole position maintained after the first completed lap. Not first corner, because we've done a lot on Lando in the first corner. Pole position maintained throughout and after really is the point of the first lap. Max, not a surprise. He's had 8 poles, and 8 times after the first lap's finished, Max is in front. Max is a Terminator. We've talked about this. This is another stat that shows it. 8 for 8. Charles, who has like a terrible pole to win conversion ratio, he's 3 for 3 this year. George, 2 for 2. Carlos, 0 for 1. Okay. Lando, 1 for 7.
Yeah.
7. 1 for 7. Got anything to say about that, color man? You're not the best in the business for nothing.
Well, yeah, I don't know, just a bit of a nothing burger stat, really. It's like,
No.
yeah, because like the pole to win ratio, I think, is more important. Who cares what happens on lap 1? If you lose the lead on lap 1 and get it back on lap 2, then no harm, no foul. Who cares? That's what this
as long
That's
as you
what this
get it
doesn't really.
back.
Well,
As long as
that's what I mean.
You
This is
can't win the race in the first lap, but you can lose it in the first lap.
well, only if you crash. But this doesn't really tell that much by itself. I think unfortunately, as a Ferrari fan, the Charles pole to win conversion is a much more damning stat because that's like, hey, you're right at the front and you very rarely cash in on it.
That's true.
It's so yeah, I mean it's a stat. It's just not one that gets me that excited.
Yeah, we didn't have this to ask Sean if it was good or not, so we may have gone.
Yeah,
into
I'm
the
glad.
arcane
I'm glad we
and
didn't.
Yeah, well, things only nerds care about department. Sorry. Moving on. We're going to close this up. We got to get to Sean, man. He's waiting.
I know. This week, the rumor mill went mental. Absolutely kind of into overdrive of 2 stories, which seem to come out of nowhere.
Chopper?
Yeah, maybe we should get the chopper because this is properly above the rumor mill, hovering right over the epicenter of the rumor mill here. First off, story came out about Alpine were looking at dropping Duhan because Briatore wanted to bring in Colapinto instead, and they went into this whole detail about how if you looked into the details, Duhan's contract wasn't a 1+1 contract. It was 5 races were all that were confirmed, and there was a buyout clause in there, so if they really didn't want him to do 5 races, they could just pay him and send him on his way. Man, it's got traction. I missed it. I kind of woke up on Friday, I think, and just sort of caught a tail end of it, and then just saw that it was all over every social media platform. And I put a post out there saying, have we missed something really big here, or is this completely made up rubbish? And almost everybody that kind of regularly comments on our stuff came in and went, yeah, file that under total made up garbage. It's like, okay.
Well, the second one that you found that I also saw was that Williams couldn't get 2 cars together. And we talked about the Destructors Championship last week and the cost of the accidents, and Albon doing his job to carry the team, and Colapinto helping out, and Logan still in the top 4 of Destructors. And will they have 2 cars for Vegas? The answer is yes. However, they won't have a different livery. No matter what they want to say, they showed the livery. They took that little yellow spot kind of behind, in front of the rear wing, and they're like, yeah, we're just going to put a different sponsor's name in the yellow spot this week. It's the same. I saw the livery, and I'm like, that's the same. And then I zoomed in, a different company name.
That's all it is. They said, "Oh, we're pleased to announce a new Vegas livery." No, you're not. You're pleased to announce a new sticker on the Vegas livery. You've just changed one of the one of the sponsors over, but it's exactly the same
Maybe that's how
paintwork,
they're saving
which is
cost cap.
fine.
Yeah, that's how they're
Which is
saving
fine
cost
because
cap.
it's
They told the designers to go take a leap this week.
maybe I got no problem with it because the actual livery is really, really nice with the yellow on there. It's just don't try and dress it up as a special. I was like zooming in, thinking, "Uh-oh, someone's going to get fired here because they've accidentally used the same picture when they announced the Brazil livery." I was looking for, Ace of Spades or some kind of Vegas
Yeah.
gesture on there, and no, just a
Nothing.
sponsor name.
All
And
right,
then I saw this
last
as well, but you
yeah.
found it. But so you bring this one
Last
in.
news as we go into the video vault. Again, a bumper week of news, so we apologize for anyone who's just waiting for Sean. He's around the corner. Oscar Piastri on Clarkson's farm. And Oscar, put this out on his Twitter. Not sure Piastri's farm will be happening anytime soon. And it's Jeremy, Caleb, and Oscar. And there was actually a video on a different feed of him trying to back up a tractor, and it did not go well.
It was
I can't
brilliant.
wait to see this. Yeah.
This was not on my bingo card at all of places I think I'm going to see an F1 driver turn up.
Agreed.
Clarkson's farm was 100% not on that list.
But
I
Clarkson's
would have
good.
listed a whole bunch of random crap before I got to this, maybe.
Agreed. But Clarkson is going to make a debut in the video vault this week. As we open the doors to the vault,
Nice segue,
nicely.
Brian.
Yeah,
Nice
I know.
segue, yeah.
I may be working on 7 cylinders instead of 8 today, but we're doing all right. Charles Leclerc going supersonic, all capitals, exclamation point after a space after supersonic. I don't know why Charles' team decided they needed an extra space there. I noticed it. I have OCD. 14 minutes on the Charles Leclerc channel. I like this a lot. So he went up in a French airplane, a two-seater, and they took him around. And I won't spoil it for those who want to watch. I'm just going to say one thing. He was totally mesmerized by the difference in the way the G-forces were applied to the body. It wasn't that there was that many more than he's used to. It was the sort of continuous aspect and the vertical versus horizontal. Again, I'm not going to say anymore. Go watch it if you want. I liked this video. You
Saw the
this?
Instagram couple of minute reel version of it, so I've probably seen the highlights. I don't need to see 14 minutes of it. But yeah, same thing. And then the comments where people are getting into the science behind how pilots deal with the vertical G-force was, pretty cool, pretty sweet.
All right. Carlos and Charles. Let me try that again. Carlos and Charles test the Ferrari F80 on the Ferrari channel. 2 minutes. This is just a commercial. You can skip
I
it.
watched all of this as well.
Do you agree it was a commercial? The balance is fantastic.
Well, was Charles being paid? Yeah, there we go. That's the word I was going to say. Was Charles being paid by the number of times he said predictable?
I think he got one delivered. I'm fairly certain I saw a reel somewhere else of him getting one delivered to Monaco. So I'm assuming that was the payment for his gushing over this.
And then was Carlos being given like? There's one point where he's like driving. He's almost like driving like essentially one-handed with his arm sticking out the window. Like he looks so relaxed in control of this thing, but the words that come out of his mouth are, "This is so fast, it's almost F1 speed." I'm like, dude, you look like you're I'm not sure you drive your F1 car like that, but okay.
Yeah, Charles had one delivered to Monaco. Carlos got a Ferrari watch. Thanks for coming. And then, as I said, Jeremy Clarkson delivers beer to the BWT Alpine F1 team at Enstone. And the Alpine channel, 5 minutes. Jeremy Clarkson's farm is a neighbor to the Alpine team at Enstone there.
Yep.
And he showed up with beer. And I'm going to spoil this one a bit because it really ain't all as good as it could be. So Pierre addresses the audience, all of the workers, the crew, the team, everybody at Enstone, and congratulates them. They had a great job in Brazil and said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And it's really exciting and fun. And then Jeremy comes in an A110, and he's got like a 6-pack of beer. And he's like, we got a bunch of beer for everyone back there to celebrate. You got to stop doing so good, or else we're going to have to sponsor Sauber. And I'm like, dang, I love that he's a fan. And he basically just ripped Sauber one. And so anyway, he looks at Pierre and he goes, Esteban? And like, that was funny, like jokingly, he knew it wasn't him. And so it was good. It was great. And then they gave him a front wing of an Alpine car. And he said something that they censored out. And I couldn't tell what it was. But anyway, if you really like Clarkson or Alpine, or people talking about front wings, go check it out. Quick fire questions with F1 drivers, favorite racetracks, snacks, and more. Personal podiums on the Formula One channel. This is 9 minutes. It's just a bunch of quick fire questions with folks, on the grid. I would say they're trying to rip off the 100 seconds of DRS question.
I think we should sue.
Yes, we definitely should. We definitely should. F1's angriest moments caught on camera. I went to a channel called Racers Reverie. 19 minutes. It was fun to watch. You got to really want this. So it's long, but it's a lot of good clips. It's not one of those like Watch Mojo things where there's like a 7-minute interlude between each clip. This is actually good. So if you want to watch it, the payoff will be there. And the final one, my favorite one. Final one. My response to People Magazine's sexiest F1 drivers list, the Stop and Go F1 channel. It's nearly 10 minutes long. It is some bloke with a microphone standing in front of a projection of drivers, and he shows the F1 list from GQ of the sexiest drivers, and then he himself re-ranks it. It is hilarious. Like, you have to go watch this. I agree wholeheartedly with his top 3. I won't share who they are.
Oh my gosh.
Why?
Oh dear.
Good-looking guys. Anyway, I laughed my butt off at this, just maybe because it was early in the morning. I saw it was like 4 in the morning as I was traveling, and I'm like, this is great. Check it out. And with that, we're going to close the video vault because we have a very important guest.
Yeah, well, I think you do the intro quite nicely, so really shut up and just play it in a second. But essentially, after trying this a few times and our calendars not quite aligning, we managed to get in touch with Sean and say, hey, we get together after the season is finished, maybe, when maybe things quieten down. He was like, well, this week leading up to, to Vegas, I got a spot in both of those 2 weeks. So all of a sudden, from not knowing when we might do it, we essentially went into, Brian, we're doing this tomorrow. So
yes, I'm about to introduce Sean. Sean, thank you again. This was awesome. You'll hear how excited I am to have him on the pod in about 3, 2, 1 seconds.
Box.
All right. It is not often that I'm starstruck by having somebody on the podcast. So any flubs and mistakes that come out of my mouth, just know it's because we are so lucky to be joined by Virtual Statman Sean Kelly. And as all the listeners of The Dirty Side know, I love stats, and I often quote Sean. So welcome, Sean. Welcome to the pod, man.
Thank you very much. I wish I was as well received by everybody else in Formula One as I am by yourself in this podcast. Thank you for having me on.
I would even say Rob's excited too, which is, you're really checking all the boxes here, my friend.
Well, I can only see him from the waist up, so I can't confirm that. But I'll go with whatever. I'll take your word for it.
Well, I do have the Valtteri Bottas calendar in the background there, so who knows if I've got anything on my lower half right now. But yeah, there we go.
Moving right along.
Yeah, it's like Brian said, really, really thrilled to have you on. But before we get into the meat of the discussion with you, we have to get you to run the gauntlet of our 100 seconds of DRS, the world famous rapid fire quiz show, allegedly. So Brian's going to run the timer. I'm going to ask you the questions. Brian, you ready with the timer?
I am, sir. Sean, are you ready to do the 100 seconds?
Yeah, born ready. What can I say?
Then let's start in 3, 2, 1, begin.
First poster you had on your bedroom wall?
It was 1987 Williams Honda, Nigel Mansell.
Nice. Favorite Formula One track?
Suzuka.
What's your favorite cheese?
Lineswold.
Best racing movie of all time?
Best racing movie of all time. It's got to be Stroker Race.
Mario or Luigi?
Luigi, he's been shortchanged. That bastard Mario's taken all the earnings and he's left his green wearing friend in the lurch.
Favorite livery of all time on an F1 car?
Favorite livery? Oh, that's a good question. Well, it probably harks back. 87 Williams Honda usually comes up quite frequently. I love the West McLaren when it was originally unveiled in 1997. Marlboro McLaren looked great. It's a great advertisement. So everybody start smoking, everybody. Let's bring cigarettes. Lung cancer was really not that bad.
If you could add a James Bond style gadget to an F1 car, what would it be?
Well, of course, Danny Kvyat wasn't a torpedo, so some cars did have those in the first place. Pass.
DRS, good or bad?
Pardon me?
DRS, good or bad?
It's means to an end. It's good in so much as it allows overtaking. But much like cigarettes, it would be better if we weaned ourselves off of it. If we had a more organic way of doing passing, I would prefer that. But if we don't, DRS is a good thing.
And that is time. That is
no,
time.
I've got to get the last one. I have to get the last one.
All right, you're allowed.
Would you rather be chased by one horse-sized duck or 10 duck-sized horses?
Yeah, bloody hell. So I listened, right, years ago, we had a long red flag in like GP2 in Monaco. And I listened to Will Buxton for about 25 minutes, bamboozling, I think it was Jerome D'Ambrosio, with this very thing, horse-sized duck, duck-sized horse. And I think Jerome D'Ambrosio was sort of regretting ever learning English at that point. I think it might have had a lot to do with him not being a racing driver anymore. I think he decided to get into management at that point. Because he realized, like, if I'm going to be asked questions like this, I don't want to do this anymore. And I think the question was just left open-ended. I'm not sure what the answer is. But peace and love to the duck-sized horse and horse-sized duck communities, and may they live in solidarity.
I might say that's probably one of the best answers we've ever had to that. But yeah, there we are. Okay, well,
So, Sean, we got to dig into a few of these and get to know you more. But one thing I have to say is, in addition to loving stats, I love sound effects. And when you brought up Danny Kvyat,
I came like a torpedo.
I will never, ever let go of Seb yelling at him in the cool-down room about coming in like a torpedo. And then when, was it like Seb's 40th or something, and people were invited, and someone mentioned it, he goes, oh, you didn't invite the torpedo? I love that interaction and that banter that we get to see occasionally as fans. So, sorry, I just had to play the
Seb's
sound.
40th? How old do you think he is?
75 years old?
From the best of my memory, I think he was born July 3rd, 1987. So that makes him 37 years old.
What? How do you know a driver's birthday?
You're asking the stat man how he knows
I think
stats
that's
about
right.
Formula One.
I'm just
Hang on a
saying.
minute. Let me just live fact check myself. I just want to check because I said July the 3rd, 1987.
Well, then it was his 35th, 30th.
July the 3rd, 1987. Points to the stat man. So yeah, 37.
I gotta
now.
say, so like this is, imagine, you've been practicing your basketball game and you meet Michael Jordan and you're thinking you could score 1 or 2 baskets, and then you realize he's greater than, like, his worst day is better than your best day. Sean Kelly knows people's birth dates. So yeah. So Sean, talk to us about how you got into this, like how your love of F1, kind of how it grew. And then in 2003, I think it was, your time with Speed. And then from there, a couple amazing facts that we'll get into, but I'm just kind of curious how it all came together to become the virtual Statman, Sean Kelly.
Well, I was a fan first and foremost. I'm not a data scientist. A lot of people think that I'm going to be this guy who does Excel architecture and all that stuff. I am nothing of the sort. I do work with a guy who does that sort of stuff, but I am the operator. Think of it as the difference between being a driver versus an engineer. Like, I couldn't design a Formula One car. Lewis Hamilton can't design a Formula One car, but he can drive a Formula One car. I'm basically, okay, I don't design the architecture, but I know how to operate it. And I know lots of various nooks and crannies in the F1 historical database architecture where I can think, that's interesting. We can cross-reference that with blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I started watching as a fan in '87. I'm not from a motorsports family. I'm not from what you might call the income demographic to be a driver. And for the longest time, it was just a thing I did, much as it is with most fans. And everyone knew it. And everyone also knew that, wow, that guy's a nerd. Like, I hope one day he loses his virginity, because it just might help him a bit. So fast forward to 2002, actually, the end of 2002. So Michael Schumacher's winning the Japanese Grand Prix at a canter. It's another win. I think he had 13. So he had 11 wins that year in 2002. And it was a record at the time. And I remember thinking, my mum always used to say you should try and get into Formula One. It can't really hurt to try, because I've got no money. I'm skint. What's the worst that can happen is that I end up not working in Formula One. Well, that's where I am now. So I cold called Speed Channel in the US. And the reason I called in the US was twofold. Firstly, as is often the case with these stories, in the beginning, there was a woman involved. My girlfriend at the time lived in the US. So I was watching this race in the US. And second of all, I thought my odds of success were higher if I called the American network than if I called a European network, because How many phone calls do they get from aspiring Formula One researchers? So it took me 2 days to get the right number. I had to call Fox Sports in Arizona, which is where I was. They put me through to Fox Sports in California, which is the head office of Fox Sports production. They then put me through to the Speed Channel office in California, which, as it turns out, is the corporate office of Speed Channel. I needed production. They put me through to Speed Channel in North Carolina, which is where production was. I got the receptionist. I said, could I speak to the Formula One producer, please? Certainly. Who's calling? It's Sean Kelly. They're expecting me. I have no idea who these people are. And naively, she put me through. And I got the voicemail of a guy called Frank Wilson, who at the time had been the producer for Formula One coverage, but went on to be the executive vice president of broadcasting at Fox Sports and for NASCAR and all this sort of stuff. And I must have left a really awe-inspiring voicemail because 2 days later, he called back. And I wasn't expecting it. And the first thing he said when he called back was he apologized because he said, I hadn't realized you're in Arizona and I'm in North Carolina. It was 8 a.m. in Arizona. I was laying in bed when the phone rang. So sort of the half-assed, like, what? Oh, hello, yes. And he asked me to put some stuff together, so I did. And I said, could I have a look at what you're doing? So he faxed that to me. He faxed it to me. That's how long ago it was, kids. One for the kids there. Yeah, everything else he sent by carrier pigeon.
Telegraph.
And he said, could you send me something, an example of your work? Certainly. So could you get me to me by tomorrow? No problem. Put the phone down. What am I going to send him? I haven't got anything. I literally don't have any work. I have nothing to base this on at all. I don't know what format he wants, how much he wants, what's it supposed to be based around, what are the key bits, what do the commentators... nothing. I had no concept of anything.
No parameters for what you were to send.
When you put the cold call in, then you wouldn't actually maybe taken the leap forward of thinking, what if this works out and it's successful and they want me to show them something? You would just, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. Like, don't worry about it.
Correct. Because why do all of that work and then just be told no? First, you want to see if they're interested. Like, well, okay, well, send us an example. Calling my bluff, in other words. And on the phone, I've been very enthusiastic about talking about the 1971 US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen, which was the first race at the revised Watkins Glen circuit. They'd modified it from 1970. Francois Savert won the race. It was his only win. It was the first win for a French driver since 1958. All this sort of stuff. And on the phone, I had done this as a deliberate tactic because... And I described like certain bumps on the track and things like that because I wanted Frank to think I was that old. I wanted him to think that I was old enough to know all this stuff. In reality, I was 22. and actually, obviously he hired me because that's how I got here. But when he eventually met me, he thought I was the son of the person he actually hired. And he's told many people, he said, I got this close to saying, hey kid, where's your dad? I've come out here to meet your dad because he'd come out out of the office, So that tactic worked. So first pro tip: don't lie. Just retain some elements of the truth until it's necessary to cough them up.
Not everything needs disclosure all the time, right?
No, but the thing is although it might be considered a little bit, shall we say, Machiavellian, what I had said about it was accurate. So I had actually proven, wow, okay, he does actually know this stuff. So then they hired me, and then came the euphoria of thinking, wow, I've just been hired to work in Formula One. That's very exciting. Followed by the sheer horror of, oh shit, I've been hired to work in Formula One. What if I don't know anything about what I'm talking about and I'm a complete fraud? I might be about to be exposed as a charlatan, thinking that I actually knew what I was talking about this whole time. The day of reckoning is at hand. So that whole February of 2003, because I'd spent like 4 months nagging him. And by the way, he hired me at $200 a race in 2003. There were 16 races in 2003. And I'm still convinced, I've never actually asked Frank, I'm still convinced to this day, he hired me at $200 a weekend to get me to stop calling him. Like, if I give him something to do, he will go away.
And it's worth it
But
for only
nonetheless,
$200. Get off.
a deal's a deal. I didn't have any money anyway. So to me, it was big money.
What did that
And
and what did that involve? That early, those first few races, is that the same kind of thing that you're doing now, but just on a much smaller scale in terms of putting the statistics in front of the commentators that were going to be then pulling these things out as if they just come up with it? Has it always been that same essence of that's what you were doing, or is it changed over time?
Essentially, it's the same thing. I mentioned that 24 hours of dread when I had to come up with something. That was a very labor-intensive 24 hours. But what I actually brainstormed in those 24 hours actually still to this day forms the framework of what I do.
Wow.
I didn't realize, like, okay, more or less, if I go back to database stuff from 2000, start of 2003, it bears strong resemblance to what I'm using in 2024. It's just there's just more of it. That's all.
Yeah.
And back then, I would be email. You know, I wasn't on site. I wasn't in the studio. I was at home, and I would send stuff. I would email stuff in, and then towards the end of the race, because I had Frank's number, I would call him and say, Frank, you know, like Australia 2003, Michael Schumacher had been on the podium. I think it was 19 consecutive races he'd been on the podium, and he was fourth in that race. So he missed the podium. It was the end of the longest podium streak in history. Okay, so hey Frank, you might want to point out the podium streak's over. Bridgestone are off the. There's no Bridgestone car on the podium for the first time since 1998. Blah blah blah. You know, Coulthard's won from 11th. All this sort of stuff. And then in the second race, Fernando Alonso took pole position, the youngest driver ever to be on pole. Then he was the youngest driver to lead, the youngest driver on the podium. Kimi Raikkonen won the race. He was the second youngest winner ever at the time, and it was the youngest average age of a podium ever. The three finishes, and that record had stood since 1974. So I was throwing this stuff at them, and luckily, although I had it right, I was very lucky to walk in at just the right time, because we just had Schumacher do the night shift and win every race out of sight in 2002, and to a lesser extent 2001. And now suddenly the whole thing's blown wide open by Alonso winning and you know, Raikkonen winning, Schumacher suddenly not winning so much. We had a genuine title battle. There was a generational shift at the start of 03. And it seemed like, wow, I wish we'd had you here last season. But in reality, it was like, no, well, Schumacher was winning every race last season.
There
wasn't a
much
lot
to
you could say about it. Yeah, it was just, you're just kind of just saying the same thing again and again. So I was lucky that it coincided with this new era of racing. And my usefulness was probably, there was a little bit of a tailwind attached to it. You know, I came in at just the right time.
So that's amazing. So speed, obviously, the coverage in the States has moved, and you cover things all over the globe. How did the kind of like next steps occur from Sean Kelly on Speed Channel F1 to where you are today? And I know there's a lot of steps, but I mean, like, how did you end up expanding the brand, but then also sort of growing, you know, around the Formula One production as well?
I can remember in about July of 03, I went to a Red Lobster, because that's the kind of person I am. I hang out at the Red Lobster. I went to the Red Lobster. It was in Flagstaff, Arizona, which actually was where my son was born. And I was walking back to the apartment with my girlfriend at the time, and I had that sort of Archimedes eureka moment, because I said, do you know what? I wonder if Speed Channel need all of this material, what about all of the other broadcasters? They must need it too. And they wouldn't mind if I provided the same material to, you know, French TV, because they're not competing for that audience,
Right.
or German TV. But the people at French and German TV would love it. It'd be so handy to them. Why don't I try the same thing with all of them? So at the start of 04, that's what I did. Now Speed were kind enough to offer me a little bit more money for the start of 2004. It was no longer 200 a race. I mean, it wasn't. I wasn't retiring on the money either, but it was a little bit more.
Well, you could afford more Red Lobster now.
I can afford more Red Lobster. I can even go as far as an Olive Garden.
Oh, take her easy.
Yeah, well, it's the same. It's the same car park, so not far. Um, and the first network that picked me up in '04 was RTE in Ireland, which is my parents' home country. So it was very exciting to tell my mum and dad that I was working for the national broadcaster in Ireland. And it sort of slowly inched its way along until 2006 when I met a journalist who's very famous within F1. You won't know her name outside of F1. Her name's Agnes Carlier. She's a Swiss journalist who's been in F1 for decades. And I met her and I said, so here's what I do. I write material for the broadcasters. And she said, oh, you're like Jacques Deschenaux, who used to author the Grand Prix Guide, the famous red book of F1 stats every year. Yeah. And I said, yeah, kind of like him, but I do it for TV. Problem is that I don't know who works for who. This is pre-social media. It was much more difficult to establish who was who. And she said to me, oh, well, I know them. Hang on there a sec. I'll introduce you to them all. And that day, which was July the 1st of 2006, I doubled my income overnight because suddenly when they became aware of me, they're like, oh, actually, yeah, that sounds good. We need that.
That's amazing.
And then I was off and running. But it took 3.5 years to get from Frank hiring me to get me to stop calling him to, okay, now we're starting to get a little bit of progress here. And then fast forward another 5 years, the BBC hired me. And then you're over the hump because then you go to people and say, well, look, the BBC are using me. Why aren't you? And then in 2013, F1 themselves hired me. And then Formula One teams started hiring me to do stuff for them. So it went out from that.
Wow.
Yeah, I've done material for half the teams on the grid. So
what kind of things, like, just if you're allowed to share a generic version of something, but like what would a team ask from a statistical or whatever they may be asking of you perspective? Like what kind of things?
Well, it's for their press office.
Okay.
Have you got any good facts about our exploits in this race? A good example would be Silverstone this year when when Lewis Hamilton took the lead with I think like 15 laps to go. Within about a lap of him being in the lead, I got a WhatsApp message saying, "Have you got any good Lewis Hamilton stats if he wins?" Why, yes, I do. And I sent a laundry list of them on the WhatsApp, communications back channel. A great deal of which you will have heard. Well, you will have heard them in the broadcast anyway. But there are a few other nuanced ones which may have made their way into Mercedes press releases from that Sunday. Yeah, I can get those messages from teams if they're having a very good day. Generally speaking, they don't want to talk to me if they've had a really bad day. It's usually a good result when they need to talk to me. But the thing is I don't really, I don't trade on that. I don't say like I am working with this team or anything like that, because I have to maintain sort of neutrality and say, look, I'm also going to say bad stuff about your drivers or performance because I work on the broadcast side and it is necessary in editorial balance. Of course, the teams want to concentrate on positives, which I totally understand. But I have to look. I have to look at the whole thing. It might be that everything is positive. Like Max Verstappen last year, it's very difficult to find anything negative to say. Whereas this year, there's been a lot more yin yang.
So when you're looking at a race and race weekend's coming up, I don't want you obviously you won't give away your secret sauce as to how you cook up your stats, but I'm kind of thinking that you've got like the obvious ones where that if so-and-so wins their next race, it'll be a milestone win, it'll be their 50th win or whatever it might be, right? So you've probably got those ones. How do you get these obscure, like the average age of the podium one? Like, is this just you knowing it because you're like the oracle of the F1 matrix? Or are you like looking ahead at the weekends and kind of going, right, well, if that, and that happens, then I've got this nice little statoid here. But if that one, and like, how much prep time does it take you ahead of a Grand Prix weekend to kind of be ready with all those little things that you want to look out for?
Well, prep now for a typical Grand Prix takes 2 days. 2 days of actually sitting and writing material I mean, it has to be compressed these days because we've got so many back to backs. The ones where it's if he wins this, it's this. You know, they're what I call standby stats. It's like, okay, so if that result happens, boom, throw that straight out. And then it's a case of it's a bit like a chess player looking at the board and thinking, okay, so this is we're gonna go here, here, here. This is the moves we're gonna make. It's like that. You look at the timing and scoring screen and go, okay, so that hasn't happened in blah blah blah. This this has happened. That's this is 200th Grand Prix victory for a car with number one. This is two French drivers on the podium. All this sort of stuff. So to be honest, it's somewhat akin to any profession in that you deal with. I deal with it every day professionally.
Yeah.
And when you've been doing it for decades, you start to get a pretty good handle on what it is that's going to be interesting and what won't be. Because ultimately, I don't really offer anything to the broadcasters unless I think it's interesting. It has to be interesting enough that I would want to hear it in a broadcast.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to be vigilant and say sometimes the best thing you can contribute as a statistician is to shut up. Like you don't need every last statistic in the broadcast. You don't need to say Max Verstappen is only the fourth driver since 1977 to have won a race with a two-stop strategy when it's rained a bit and there's been a safety car and at least one red flag. And he was outside the top 10 in the first 4 laps. It literally, I will hit you on the head with a bar. So that stuff that's not going in.
Yeah.
If you ever hear that in a broadcast, it wasn't me what wrote it, because I fiercely against that stuff. Sometimes the best thing you can contribute is silence. Shut up and let people enjoy the race. That stuff's main character syndrome. We're not main characters. We're the ball boys at Wimbledon. If we do it right, we contribute to the thing you came to watch without you really noticing that we did it. That's really what we are. So there's a lot of prep involved, but then you can get some strange results. And those are actually the most fun. Take, for instance, the Alpines double podium in Interlagos, which was, who predicted that?
Nobody.
So that's entertaining when you think, oh, blimey, when was the last time we had 2 Frenchmen on the podium? I haven't looked in, must have been eons since I looked at that.
Well, I know your stat, wasn't it? Alesi and Panis?
Yes, it was. Yes, Spanish Grand Prix of 1997. Very good.
I'm logging off. I can't get any better than that. I'm done. Sorry, keep going, Sean. Apologies.
Yeah, do you remember the last time that Enstone had 2 cars on the podium in the same race?
Yes, but I can't off the top of my head because my memory's
Can you
not
remember
as
the year?
good.
Remember the year, maybe?
07?
No.
I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank.
It was Korea 2013, I believe.
I flew too close to the sun on wings of
did.
bad memory.
You did. So, Sean, sorry, Brian, you mentioned about the compressed
Yes.
timescale, the 2 days. That kind of led on to something I was just kind of thinking, like when Paul comes on and talks about these triple headers and what it means to kind of the teams and everything. Then, I mean, a triple header for you, you've had to compress your timescale, I guess, because that's got to be fairly brutal getting ready for 3. You've just come off the back of one. You've got another one coming up now with Vegas. So, I guess that's had to crunch your timescale as well. Then, with the amount of races coming onto the calendar.
Yeah, you have to be vigilant of the lead time. You have to think, look, all this stuff needs to be done, because obviously there's stuff that can be done in advance. Like, okay, well, let's look at last year's race. So the Abu Dhabi is the 3rd of the triple header to end the year. Okay, well, can we have a look at Abu Dhabi today while we're sitting around, rather than waiting until Tuesday morning of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix before we start diving into that? Can we do it now so we can give ourselves a bit of a breather? So at least we've got all of that content done, and then we can load it in once we're ready, once we know what the results of the previous race are, and we mangle it all together to create a grand narrative. But it does get quite tough, because especially when you're traveling, and I appreciate, if you want to get, I don't know if you guys have ever used an electron microscope, but if you've ever looked into one, and if you turn it up to its maximum possible power, and you put one of those little, those little sort of glass slides they put there, science. Yeah. If you look in that and you put it up to the maximum power, you'll just about see the size of the violin that you'll be playing when you listen to me whinge about this bit. But it is tough going to all these Grand Prix and also having to work while in transit. It's very disruptive to be on an aircraft, or the jet lag, all this stuff. The deadlines don't move. You still got to do it. And yeah, that can be quite a challenge, and mainly because of human error. I noticed like typos start to creep into my work by the third weekend, because you just realize like, oh, it's burnt out on this. There's just an overwhelming amount. Of course, you could say do less, but in this social media age, it's very. My job is basically boiled down to: can you beat Twitter? Or somebody on Twitter points it out, can you come up with it first? Which is that's the short form of what my job is, and you've got to always put the same quality of material out every week, and that becomes very painstaking and laborious. And there's a lot of evenings where you think, okay, I'm gonna have all this done by 8 o'clock tonight, and then by 1:30 a.m. when you're like, oh my god, make it stop. There's a lot of nights like that, but in fairness, it is counterbalanced by the fact that I get to influence a lot of the global narrative by what is written in those pages. And I get to go to F1 races, which, what's not to love about that? So it's not all doom and gloom.
Well, I would say, A, that sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing those parts. B, when I log on to Formula1.com and I get the facts and stats headline, and I know it's yours, I mean, that's just the highlight of post-race.
Do you know the funny thing is,
recap.
I never look at that thing. I never.
It's okay. We do it for you.
Right. I never look at it because what they put on there is that is basically what I have written in the 5 minutes after the checkered flag. I swear to you, I'm not. that is not an exaggeration.
Based on timing, I believe you. I mean, it's pretty quick
like
after the race. 30 minutes is when it gets published, usually, give or take.
All that stuff has to go before the drivers are on the podium, effectively.
Wow.
So all of that material has to go because it forms a basis of the post-race coverage for so many of the broadcasters. So that is the biggest crunch of time pressure of all, is checkered flag at the end of qualifying, checkered flag at the end of the Grand Prix. And a huge amount of concentration is required to make sure that all of it goes out without a typo. Sometimes that can happen.
Well, and if I have this, sorry, Brian, after you.
Yeah, thank you. And so, you say finding that happy medium of the statistics and what's shared and what is too much, but what, kind of influences the narrative or is interesting that you'd want to hear. For me, there are certain things that just have a certain harmony. And you pointed this out. Max, since summer break, hadn't been within 19 seconds of the winner. And then all of a sudden in Brazil, he won by 19 seconds. And like those kind of weird balancing acts where there's some kind of harmony to it. I don't want to call it symmetry because there's many races of you get my point. I love seeing those things. And when you publish them, they're just tremendous. And Rob and I went to our first Grand Prix at Canada last year, and we looked up at the podium and we couldn't quite figure out why it was so important, but we were talking about it. It was Max and Lewis and Fernando, and Newey went up with Max. And we're like, this is like the GOAT of all podiums. And you, of course, had a stat about the number of championships reflected. And that's a good example in my mind of how we couldn't figure out what the statistic was that was so powerful right behind the scenes. But we're both looking at it like, this is an amazing podium because we could see it from our seat. So it's that trained eye that you have is amazing, man. And,
it was an all-world champion podium, which I forget now. Forget what the stat was, because there was a couple of them last year.
You forgot the stat? Should we stop recording?
There hadn't been an all-world champion podium, I think, since like 2017, 2018 sort of time. And yeah, it surprised me how long it had been since there'd been an all-world champion podium. And then they sent Newey up for good measure. So it's kind of up there with when it was, I think it was Senna, Hill, and I think Schumacher was on the podium in Brazil in '93, and Fangio gave the winner's trophy. So that's another really an amazing podium
for sure.
All through, because they're all obviously everyone up there is world champions and so on.
That's tremendous. So can we move to this season a little bit? We'll cover a couple more stats as we go. I have
go
a few
on
things
then.
We're saving. So as you look at this year, like, do you think there's a chance, just stats aside for a second, Rob and I have talked a lot about it on this here podcast, and friend of our show, Rob Reed, writes for Forbes. He's covered this as well. It's been a really fun season to watch as a fan. And maybe you have a team or driver that isn't doing as well. But the fact that for the first time in a while, we haven't known who's going to win some of these races when you go in, or who would even be on the podium per se. You had, of course, a great stat, and one of my favorites. We haven't had 4 teams winning multiple races since 90, and we haven't had 4 teams winning at least 3 races each since 77. So are you as excited by this? And again, we can talk more about Max and stats, but are you excited about this parity? And do you think McLaren will win the constructors, or is Ferrari hot on their tail, or is that too far apart?
Am I excited about this parity, or am I excited about this parody?
Well, is it funny?
Important distinguishing mark.
Is there humor, or is there a more of an even playing field?
There's humor in everything if you're dark enough. Anyway, yes, I am in a nutshell, because I get an itch listening to, well, to use a term I used on Twitter recently, boring old farts who go on about how F1 was better in their day. And I'm here to say, no, it bloody wasn't. Because we've got 6 drivers with multiple wins. That's only happened once before. That was in 81. As you mentioned, we got 4 teams that were at least 3 wins each. The last time then was 1977. We've had, if you took the first 5 Grand Prix out of this season, which was basically an extended version of the last season, from Miami onwards, it's a whole new championship. And ever since then, we go in every week thinking, well, Ferrari have absolutely had it. They're finished. I bet Lewis is regretting moving. Mercedes are in the ascendancy. Oh, McLaren have won. Oh, great. Okay, well, now it's McLaren. Now McLaren are amazing. And then, oh, Ferrari have just won. I didn't see that coming. Did anybody else see Ferrari coming? And then it's Mercedes again. Mercedes are the 1-2. Oh, no, wait, one of them's been disqualified. But it still counts. They were still 1-2 on the racetrack. It's been back and forth like that. And then Max Verstappen, who's been sort of forced into a Schumacher style overdriving a car that shouldn't be up there, because I think you've got to look at Checo's performance and say that's closer to a true reflection of the car,
right? Because
usually it's the second driver that gives away where the car is. Verstappen has been not overdriving the car, but he's been overdriving its actual ability to hang in there. And I think, this has been a fantastic defensive run by Verstappen to really not get to the point where he was seriously threatened for the championship. We went into Grand Prix Sunday at Sao Paulo thinking, if Lando wins it, which he may well from the position he was starting the race, and Verstappen doesn't score, which he may well, given where he's starting.
17.
The gap was going to be, I think, 19 points. And instead, it's basically, this is match point now. This is Max is going to wrap this up in Las Vegas, which is an astonishing turnaround. So we've seen all things to all people this season, and it's been fascinating. The only thing that makes it sad is that we had those first 5 races of the year when Max absolutely thrashed everybody, and that put it out of sight. It bears resemblance to Jenson Button in 2009, and it also bears resemblance to Ayrton Senna's last title in 1991. When Senna won the first 4 in a row. He was the first driver at the time, it sounds so quaint now, he was the first driver ever to win the opening 4 races of a season. And as Nigel Mansell would put it at the end of 1991, we didn't lose the title in the second half of the season. We lost it in the first 4 races. Right. After that, it was our title to lose, but we'd already lost it at that point.
Yeah.
And if Max does indeed wrap this up, but as seems very likely, it will be on the back of capitalizing on that advantage they had in the first part of the season. Will McLaren win the Constructors' Championship? If you'd asked me that before Austin, I would have said this is in the bag. And then suddenly after Austin, I thought, whoa, hang on a minute. there's a third way coming down the rail here. It might end up being Ferrari. I think we've all ruled Red Bull out of it. The way this season's going.
We did last week. We talked about it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. If Perez puts another couple of performances in like he did in Baku, where he absolutely schooled Verstappen in Baku. It was such a shame that it all ended in the wall with Carlos Sainz, because up to that point he'd out-qualified him and out-raced him. Yeah. So that does show that Checo is capable of doing it when the car's right. So who knows? I did think it was McLaren's titles to lose. Perhaps it still is, but I can't say for certain it's in the bag. I think Max will wrap it up in Las Vegas, but
Yeah.
but we've still got a constructors title to play for.
So, as we said, we love the statistics here. Users submit jingles, a couple of them over the last few years. I'm going to play one or two of them here and then just ask you a couple questions. They're very short. It's how we introduce the
Substance.
So they get like a little bit of the SAP stats in there. And so we'll play some of these.
Fantastic.
And after every race, we'll have some statistics. And more often than not, I haven't had time to go find any good ones, and I'll just borrow some of yours with citation from Sean Kelly. I always say that. So I hope you don't mind we borrow them from the F1 website.
Sincerest form of flattery. Can I say, by the way, have you ever heard when Top Gear did a drive time radio show? You can find this on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
And those jingles that you just played reminded me of the ones that they had in that show.
I may have done a jingle marathon a few weeks ago in one of the off weeks, and Rob still to this day is pretending that episode didn't happen.
Oh, don't go back
I'm
down
not gonna
there.
play those. Sean, we'll keep you away from that. But with that, opening kind of some stats. You mentioned Button in 2009 and the season he had at Braun. I guess the question I'd have is, there have been so many weirdo stats this year that, at least to me, that like you would never think of. Robert Schwartzman got that 5-place grid penalty. He's not on the grid, so that thing will just sit out there hanging out. And I believe Button had one as well when he filled in for somebody, reserve driver. Do you know, are there other penalties just hanging out there for all time that will never be served? I like we saw that. I'm like, that's a crazy stat.
I don't know. I hadn't thought about it until you just posed it. I think the incident you're talking about is when Jenson Button sent Pascal Wehrlein into the harbour in Monaco in 2017. I had Jenson on stage the other day, and we were talking about how it's been 7.5 years since he last raced in F1. And I got this close to saying, so did you actually pee in Fernando's seat that day? Because that's what he said he was going to do. And for some reason, we got sidetracked. We went off on a different topic, and I never got to pose that question. Coincidentally, I was on the stage with Beat Zender in Mexico City when Schwartzman got the penalty, and Zender had to go to the steward's office to argue the toss with them about this thing.
Really?
And I said, isn't it fantastic? Like, a driver who's not racing in Formula One's got a 5-place grid penalty. What are you going to do about it, Beat? How does that affect the weekend preparation?
Not good for Robert, but for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, there's been drivers that have been called, sanctioned for strange things. I know that there was underwear violations in Formula E a few years ago.
What? I missed those.
That happened. Like, I can't remember the detail, but some of the drivers didn't wear the correct FIA approved underwear, fireproof underwear, and they got fined. That sort of stuff's happened.
Do you have a bank of these types of statistics that are so far out there off the rails that you're ready with these too?
I mean, maybe I should.
Do you need an intern to help you build it?
I think so. 1969 Canadian Grand Prix. There was a Canadian privateer who'd enter the Canadian races called Al Pease, and he was black flagged at Motorsport Park 1969 for being too slow. He was
like
so
26
slow,
laps down or something
got
crazy.
Disqualified. Yeah, but he also, I think he had an underpowered car. Like, he had a 2.4 liter engine. Everybody else had a 3 liter engine. That's an interesting one. There will be many other examples that they're just not coming to mind right now of sanctions being handed out from.
Well, Sean, if you need an intern, an unpaid intern, to help come up with some of these ridiculous items, the Statman is all yours. You let me know. All right.
All right. I should add that the 3 questions I get asked the most in my life are: how did you get that job? Can I have your job? And do you need an assistant?
Unpaid intern is far different than assistant, and with a focus on ridiculous statistics. That's what
there was this goddess of a woman in Sao Paulo last week who has like 1 million Instagram followers. And she asked me the question, do you need an assistant? And I said, yes, actually, yes, I do need an assistant. So yeah.
Well, I don't want to compare myself to her, but
let's do that. I mean, obviously, I tested her quite thoroughly on the career of Piercarlo Ginzani, and she came through that with flying colours. So
Would
Princess
she have
Book Ride's cover.
known that it was McLaren, Ferrari, Lotus,
Oh,
and Wolf that were the last time that the four teams had 3 win races in a year in 1977? Wolf, I'd never even heard of Wolf till I went back and looked.
You'd never heard of Wolf?
No, that's how bad I am at this. Rob,
Well,
do you
she'd
know
heard
Wolf?
of Wolf, so you're sacked, son.
just to try to get this
You've
back on
never
track
heard of
ever since.
I know,
sorry,
right? So I'm
I've
not
got
perfect.
my mind is blown. Never heard of Wolf. Wolf won on their Grand Prix debut. What was it? Argentina, 1977. Jody Scheckter.
Scheckter,
In
yeah.
the Wolf WR1, it would have been. And
I
it
would have given you
was,
Scheckter, but I wouldn't have known who he drove for. I would have
yeah, and
wandered the woods for a while.
He won Monaco that year, 77 as well. And I think he won Canada in 77. I think he had three wins.
He definitely had 3.
Wins.
He had all 3 of the Wolf wins that year.
Yeah, of course he did, because it was a one-car team. What am I saying?
But I couldn't have told you where.
That was a Harvey Postlethwaite car, if I remember right. One of the great designers that you never hear about anymore because he died so young.
Oh.
We digress.
Yes, so just in this kind of summing up the love of facts that obviously Brian has, as you can tell, we wanted to know from you, do you have is there such a thing as a favourite fact or a favourite moment? I guess when we had, just a name drop, when we had Villeneuve and Bottas on the show, we kind of asked them favourite memory, like favourite overtake, not necessarily favourite win, just favourite moment where you nailed it and just thought to yourself, yeah, I got it. Have you got a moment where like some fact that you put out there that went on air and it went out there and as you heard it on the broadcast, you're just like, yeah, that's the one. bank that one.
Sean Kelly,
that's
baby.
gold.
Yeah, there are a couple from early in my career that helped establish me. Monza 2003 is the one I always cite because I had worked out in advance of the race the exact time down to a thousandth of a second that was necessary to complete the race in order to break the record as the fastest race in history. That record had stood since Peter Gethin set it in 1971. And that was the last Monza race without chicanes. And I realized we were approaching that record and could beat it. Michael Schumacher won that race in 2003. Stop the clock. Clock appears on the screen, average speed and everything. Like, okay, average speed's on the screen. That's right. Let me just check my maths because I like to just check that the graphic's not wrong. Yeah, okay, that's definitely right. Okay, so I called Frank Wilson because I was still at home at this point. Frank, that's the fastest Grand Prix in history, just under 154 mile an hour average. The record stood for 32 years, has just fallen. We had it on the air as Speed Channel before Schumacher hit Parc Ferme. And there then followed 18 hours of silence. No one else reported it. And I bearing in mind this was my first year in Formula One, I did genuinely have this moment of thinking, this is not looking great. Like, why is no one else saying this? And I remember sending an email early evening, like Eastern Standard Time, saying, it's been fantastic working in Formula One, and I will no doubt continue to watch you guys in the future. Thank you for the opportunity that was given unto me this season. I'll never forget it. And then the next morning, the rest of the English language media picked up on this, that it was the fastest race ever. So we'd beaten everybody by a day. So we were the only network that had it. And we had it before Schumacher even hit it. The car had even stopped moving.
That's awesome.
So that was a big one. And that record still stands. And therefore, that makes me the first person to have reported it. Even 21 years later, I was still the purveyor of history there by saying, yep, that's it. He's got it. There was actually another Schumacher one was Montreal 04. Peter Windsor used to do the post-race interviews, and 04 Michael was winning every race. He won, what was it, 10 of the first 11, something like that. And in Canada that year, he was winning in Montreal for the 7th time in his career. It was the first time anybody had won the same race 7 times. And Windsor called me up because I was at home. And he said, have you got anything I could talk to Michael about? And, because I'm kind of running out of things to say here, starting these interviews. I said, well, tell him it's the first time anyone's ever won the Grand Prix 7 times. Now, Michael was not interested in statistics. He didn't find it very exciting. But Windsor said, yeah, all right, we'll give that a go, see what he does. So he opens the post-race unilateral interview. Michael, congratulations, you've set history. That's the first time anyone's ever won the same race 7 times ever. And Michael actually reacted and said, "Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. Wow. That's a new record, huh?" After that, Windsor would call me every race and say, "Have you got anything for whoever is winning the race?" And that's how that started in terms of, okay, can you influence the post-race interview? But on the basis of Michael's befuddled reaction at Montreal 2004. But then there were negatives ones as well. I mean, Monaco this year, you will have no doubt seen the stat that it was the first race in the history of Formula One where the top 10 finished in grid order.
Yeah.
And that, I remember with about 20 laps to go, being aware, like, oh, wow, we're going to beat the record here for most positions. The previous record we had in that regard was the top 6. It happened twice before. The top 6 are finishing grid order. And then I looked down to 7th. I was like, oh, wow, we're going to beat that record. And I thought, oh, no, wait, hang on a minute. 8, 9, 10. Whoa, 10. Oh, shit. What, the top 10 are in order. So I went to Michaeli, who I work with on stats when I think, like, we need to do a deep dive on this because this is a big stat. I need to make sure it's right. Okay, so you go away and you do a deep dive on the database. I'll do a shallow dive on my idiot database. But once we were comfortable, we had arrived at all the same numbers. Yeah, there's everything right. This has never happened before. Send it with like 10 laps to go. And then, of course, it went viral. It became a major talking point in a negative way,
right,
of what are we going to do about the Monaco Grand Prix and the red flag rules. That means once you change tires, no one needs to pit.
Don't get Rob started on the red flag rules. But your stat was so good, we quoted it as one of those special Sean Kelly's. And then Max's team radio at there
This is boring. Should have brought my pillow.
This is boring. Should have brought my pillow. That was his Monaco. There was a profanity in front of that there. But
I get asked all the time by guests at Formula One races, which you get to go to F1 races all around the world. Which ones do you think we should go to? And I often say, well, in fact, my standard response is, it depends what sort of experience you want. Do you want the chin-chin on the yacht, or do you mind standing on a hillside in sideways rain and gale force wind to see a Formula One car come through the Ardennes forest at 200 miles an hour and to blow the doors off everything? There are so many different experiences you can have watching a Formula One race. In the case of Monaco, have either of you ever been to the Monaco Grand Prix?
We've both been to Monaco, but not the Grand Prix.
Okay, so the Monaco Grand Prix is, by some margin, the most boring 2 hours that happen in Monaco that week. Everything else that happens in Monaco is astonishing. You have to go. It is the best fun you will ever have at a Grand Prix. And then we have this procession, unfortunately. Which we all have our varying opinions on how we could fix that, how we could make it easier to overtake. But don't let those 2 hours of boredom dissuade you from going to that race, because it is brilliant. The fact that everything's just sort of piled in on top of each other, and they have to open the streets to the public, and the great unwashed get to mingle with the VIPs because they can't keep them apart. It's brilliant. So that is a tremendous race to go to. Just unfortunately, the race itself is usually dull.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Sean, we've held you long enough. Rob, is it all right if we let Sean go? Because we promised him a shorter time than this, and he's been very generous.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's mainly down to you and your ridiculous fanboying. So,
okay, it's my fault.
Did we have other stuff that we were going to?
I do want to highlight one thing on the way out that's very important.
I was going to say I've got a bit more time, and also I have not completed this cup of tea, so we are not at an emergency level.
A stat before we get to the close, a stat then, and we're going to use what is my favorite stat jingle, is the Slap House intro, and we'll do this. Sap Stats, Statman Sean Kelly edition. Is it true, Sean, that you are the only person who's worked on every production of Formula One in the U.S. since 2003?
Yes, that is true. Whether you have heard Formula One on US television spoken by David Hobbs, by Steve Matchett, by Rick DeBrule, by Peter Windsor, by Will Buxton, by Bob Varsha, by Lee Diffie, by Brian Till, by Ralph Shaheen, by Derek Daly, by Townsend Bell, by David Croft, Martin Brundle, Ted Kravitz, Karen Chandok, Anthony Davidson. The list goes on and on. But there is one person who has worked on every single one of those broadcasts, Include when that is me, and that includes when I did double duty on ABC and ESPN2 at the same time in Canada last year, because I was providing stats for the regular broadcast of F1 for the Canadian Grand Prix, at the same time as I was appearing as one of the co-presenters of the Grandstand, Daniel Ricciardo and Will Arnett's watch-along show. I was the third person. We were cast as one person is an expert driver, one person is slightly blokish, new fan to the sport, and one person is the nerd who knows everything. I'll let you work out for yourself which one was me.
That's amazing. Ricardo, by the way, one of my favorite stats, him and Checo, the only drivers who went with two different constructors in the turbo hybrid era. This is one of yours, I think. I saw it and I'm like, oh my God.
No, that's not mine. No, that's not mine.
Is it right? Do you know, it seems right. I was thinking about it because Checo won the Racing Point at the end in Bahrain, and then, of course, Red Bull, and Danny Rick with Red Bull, and then his McLaren Monza victory. So it seems right. I can't think of anyone else. I've gone through it.
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody else. No, I mean, the thing is drivers don't tend to move around very much these days. That's why next year is going to be so interesting, because we've got nearly half the grid on the move.
So great.
So that'll be a nice shake-up. Because, I mean, at the start of this year, the grid was the same as it was when we finished last year. So it was like, okay, it's just a continuation of last season. Whereas that is definitely not the case next season.
Right.
It's a whole new ball game.
Maybe that's a good question to kind of end on. So, Rob and I did some analysis. I forgot the number. I want to say from 2014 to 2024, there was an incredible amount of overlap. And meaning drivers who'd been in 14 and still here in 24. And this year at Spa, we had, I think everyone in the points were Grand Prix winners. I may be wrong on that, but I'm close. And so that was the first time we'd had, 10 people in the points paying positions who'd all won a Grand Prix at some point. However, next year, right, we've got this turnover, as you say, and at least 5 or 6 very young drivers on the grid, rookies to some extent, some with a little experience this year. How excited are you for that? Like, as I look at it, I'm more of a driver fan than a team fan. So I'm excited to get to know the next generation, the next set of young drivers to enter F1. But I'm just kind of, it's always interesting as you meet other F1 fans. Are they excited? Are they going to miss? For us, like watching Valtteri potentially leave the grid is sad. But seeing people like, more of the idea of Bortoletto coming in and watching Kimi Antonelli and all of the young guys like Liam, who's on there now, and Jack, and all the opportunities these drivers will have, like, does that bring new statistics and new views to things for you that's exciting? Or is it just as a fan you're excited for F1 regardless and you can't wait for next year anyway?
Well, I'd probably be the same either way. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I mean, 37 years into it as a fan and 21 years into it professionally. I've seen a lot of people come and go. There's just me and Alonso left who haven't got a real job. Everybody else at some point has been bullied into the real world. And me and him are still getting away with it. So I've seen a lot of change in that time. It will be interesting to see the presence of so many young drivers. We'll have 5 drivers on the grid next year under the age of 22. That's never happened in Grand Racing before. So that will be interesting. I live for the day that Fernando Alonso is racing against 19 drivers, none of whom who were alive when he started, because we are well on the way to getting there. So there was a time when that had never happened before, and that time was up until the start of last season. And now rapidly, Alonso's heading for a quarter of the grid who were not born when he was racing. And by the way, 7 million nerd bonus points to anybody who correctly pointed out that Alex Rossi shared the track with Michael Schumacher in FP1 Spain 2012. And Alex Rossi was born the month after Michael Schumacher made his Grand Prix debut, but he only did practice, so he didn't race against him. Yeah, I'm excited about it regardless. It's same as it ever was, as David Byrne once. You're never quite sure what's going to happen, and there are people who would say that McLaren. Imagine how good McLaren are going to be next season. After the gains they made this year, there's no guarantee McLaren will be anywhere next year. If you'd watched Red Bull last year, you'd have been convinced that Red Bull would dominate this year,
right?
Especially if we were having this conversation on the 1st of May this year.
Still going.
Instead, they're third in the championship.
Right.
I mean, that's an astonishing fall from grace in terms of the Constructors' Championship. We're going to have this situation now where the world champion is going to come from the third place team for the first time in more than 4 decades. So it's I love the unpredictability, and I love the fact that we're able to achieve this at a time of financial, not parity, but financial safety. We are no longer in the arms race that was throwing money into a pit. The 10 teams are actually financially viable going concerns.
Yeah.
And that also, we haven't talked about the Andretti situation, that does factor into why the teams are so reticent to let an 11th team in, because after all these years that they had to sort of scrimp along and just trying to make sure they didn't go bankrupt, now they're actually on a sound financial footing. So they're thinking, well, why do we want to mess this financial model up when we finally got it where it actually stands for itself? So that's the good thing. You know, at least we're not thinking to ourselves, oh, such and such are going to need pay drivers next year or else they're going to go bust. You know, that's no longer a conversation. No? So it's a very good time to be an F1 fan. And to cross-reference my remarks from earlier, I get tired listening to old farts who say it was better in their day. It may have been good in their day, but that's to suggest that Formula One is not in good health right now is just, you know, you have to be delusional. You got so many different winners, so many different teams. You got a championship still up for grabs. Yes, I know DRS is still a thing. We talked about it earlier. It's a means to an end. I wish we didn't have to have it, but at least we do have it. Because if we didn't, half of these races wouldn't have any passing at all. So that's something. They'd all look like the Monaco Grand Prix. And a lot of people think the Monaco Grand Prix sucks. Mainly people who've never been to it.
Oh man, Sean, thanks for doing this. There's many expressions about not meeting the people you look up to or you think are awesome. You've exceeded.
And you haven't met them today because you've ended up talking to me for an hour.
You've exceeded every expectation, my new friend. This is the Formula One circus is the most welcoming and nice place, and that you're another example of that. So, thanks for doing this. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being on the dirty side with us.
Thank you very much. And gentlemen, 5 years from now, could you please give me a job when I'm out of work and I really need something to do?
Done and done. Thanks for joining us, Sean.
Cheers.
Box.
Yeah, thanks again for doing that, Sean. That was brilliant. And I must admit, I never probably really thought about his job beyond, say, what we see on social media and what you pick up from the stats. The whole kind of, every time you've ever heard Crofty or any of the on-air broadcasters mention these statistics, and you know there has to be somebody somewhere pulling them together, and I've always just thought it was a company that was kind of maybe doing it, or there's an army of people. It's essentially Sean and probably a couple of people that help out. But I think it was like when he was talking about ball boys and ball girls. And if they're doing their job properly, you don't even know that they're there. Same thing with a good referee in any kind of sport, right? If they're doing their job properly, you don't know that they're there. And he was actually talking about other things, really. But I think that's true, same of him. Like the fact that he's probably one of the unsung talents behind Formula One broadcasts for what, 20 odd years?
Yeah.
But most people won't know who he is. Most people will just hear the stats coming out of Crofty's mouth on the weekend and won't even pay any kind of thought to the fact of where did that come from. So I just like the fact that yeah, it's kind of, if he does his job well, no one really knows who he is. It's just
except for those of us who love what he does.
100%, 100%.
And I agree. It was so cool having him on, Sean. That's just amazing. And I am serious. I won't be your assistant, but I'm happy to be your unpaid list stats that no one else knows they need. When you think ridiculous stats, you call Brian.
Wow, that's right. Yeah. So, okay. So, yeah, thanks again, Sean. Amazing. But now we turn our attention to the bright lights of the Vegas Strip. Next week,
I don't mean to cut you off, but this is how we have to start Vegas preview.
Vegas, baby, Vegas!
Can never forget. All right, now go ahead.
This is a bit of a kind of funny one because going into doing the preview where I normally kind of do like the history of the circuit and previous winners and all this kind of stuff. But last year at Vegas, it feels like an episode recap. Last time on Vegas. But
last time on Vegas, they didn't know how to glue down, lids of drains.
Yeah. So we should do it in that style. Last time on Vegas, we had 50 laps of a 3.853 mile upside down pig. 17 corners, so that puts it, I think, on the joint lowest end of the spectrum in terms of corners, or close, sorry. Yeah. It's not up at the 20-odd sets of corners, but it's got a 1.18 miles straight down of the pig. despite most of it is on roads all around Vegas, Formula One bought up a huge chunk of land so they could actually put permanent structure for pits and paddock facilities,
Yep.
which I have read on Twitter. Can't remember who put it out there. Maybe it was Vincenzo Landino, somebody, or James Coker. Somebody put out a tweet saying, "What's the disruption like in Vegas this year? Because last year it was atrocious. You know, the taxi drivers, the residents, everybody was up in arms about Formula One coming to town." And from what I've read so far, they're saying, well, no, because a lot of all that permanent structure stuff was done and they don't need to redo it, nor did they need to resurface. It's not bad this year, actually. Yeah, you can tell Formula One Circus is coming to town, but nothing like the disruption it was causing the residents last year, which I always think is a good thing because you don't want to turn the
Right.
town or the city against the event, right?
And I know you talk about the straight. I would just say there is a corner. It's like a bend
Yeah.
on the strip. So
I don't think they need to lift, though, do they?
No, definitely not. So it
That's a
is
straight in my book.
exactly. So once you kind of come around that corner by the golf course, you do Koval and then around Sphere, and then you come back. As you turn the straight, it's just pedal to the metal until you get to wood. So, yeah, I agree. I also saw that quite as bad as last. But last year was a little crazy, right? We had practice start, and then Carlos's car got nuked by the sewer lid, the drain lid that got sucked up under his. And there's a ton of videos out there. Curious how that works in the suction of car, the downforce, and the aero. And I'm actually very happy Carlos wasn't in. I know we talked about it then too, but I think there was actually got into his survival opened up a bit. He could see the ground through his. I'm like, that's
true.
not
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
That is bad. But so then that was delayed, and then FP2 was a disaster. They kicked everybody out, and they waited.
That was
for hours.
awful, wasn't it?
It was terrible the way that happened.
They extended FP2 because there was almost no FP1 running, but what's the point of extending it when you essentially kicked everybody out? But I guess it's for the teams to get the running in.
Exactly,
but that was awful
they had
when
to
they
get the road open by 6 a.m. or whatever. They couldn't have people sitting in the stands, and they had to get them out to get it going. So that kind of stunk. But I enjoyed the race. Then we got.
I was going to say, I was going to say the practice was just serving up and feeding all the fears that everybody had got going into this. Like Paul had said, he wasn't looking forward to going to Vegas. Nobody wanted to go there. It was going to be gimmicky. It was going to be an awful track. It was going to be all the razzmatazz that nobody wants, but with no substance on the track. It was kind of essentially going to be America's Monaco. It would have glamour and glitz and nothing going on the track. And yeah, the barrage of abuse that was coming out about the loose manhole cover because everyone liked to conveniently forget that the same kind of thing had happened in Baku before. It's like, no, this is Vegas not knowing how to put on a race. But kind of the redemption story came in. Quali gave us Charles and Carlo 1 and 2 with Max tucked in behind. And then the race was pretty good. Poor Orlando, he's going to be hoping for a better a view of action this year because he had a big crash on lap 3 and was out. And then we just saw Ferrari worked really well here. I mean, last year, remember, what was it? Singapore was the only one when we'd had a non-Red Bull winner. I think Sainz in Singapore, and this one started at one point looking like maybe Charles is gonna get the win here, but a little bit of unluckiness with safety car timings. I think Max pulled ahead at the end, and it became a Checo and Charles battle. They were ding-donging back and forth, and then Charles absolutely nabbed him on the... he'd been doing it a few times, hadn't he? It was that last corner.
Yes.
He'd been flying up the inside.
Yeah,
he was braking. His late braking was so much better than anybody else. And when he got Checo on that last lap, such a good overtake. Such a good overtake.
So Max can win the title in Vegas, and the odds on this, Norris needs to make up at least to keep his chances of winning the title alive. So what that means is, after Vegas, the gap to Verstappen is 59 points. He has a chance. We know he doesn't have it, but he hypothetically has a chance if Max doesn't run the last 2 races. 60 points is the magic number.
I know, but as the late great Murray Walker said, anything can happen in Formula One, and it usually does. So who knows? Last week was the big points haul for Lando, which didn't transpire because Max did an epic drive from the back and Lando messed up a pole position. Who knows? Max could drive into a wall this weekend and suddenly Lando wins and we get a 25 bite out of the lead, but it probably won't. My heart probably says that Max will secure the championship this weekend, but anything can happen. It doesn't even have to be Max's fault. Somebody could just drive into the side of him and we've seen stranger things. I'd love it to kind of go a little bit further into maybe to a big sort of playoff at the end of the season, but do you know what? If Max wins it, then fair play to him because he's kind of had his first few races of dominance, then was massively under attack as all the other teams seemed to converge. And he's always found a way of grinding out just enough points to keep himself in the championship. So
I'm guessing that we will Max Verstappen once again singing "Viva La" into the race in a place he apparently hates to go, because this time he will be the.
yeah, and I think even Paul said it in the review afterwards. Lots of the pit lane changed their view of the Vegas race. Actually, and he said, what did he say on his review last year? Something along the lines of, "I'm almost surprising myself here, where I'm saying I'm looking forward to coming back next year."
Yeah.
So it was a complete turnaround, I think, in both the people that work within F1 and the fans. I think we went in thinking it was going to be an absolute cluster. I think it redeemed itself, and as long as it can kind of do that again. One little statoid I would like to just pick up on last year, just to show how far things have come or how far people have fallen. Um, Last year, Checo finished third and wrapped up second in the World Drivers' Championship, meaning that Red Bull got their first ever 1-2 in the World Drivers' Championship. That's not going to happen this year.
And why do you say that? You don't think Checo can finish second? He currently is 8th, 151. Lewis is at 109. So he's so far from even having a chance to getting 7th. The good news is Alonso's on 62, so he's not going to drop to 9th. So Checo's pretty much locked into 8th. So first and 8th? That's not as good as first and second?
Second to 8th is one heck of a drop.
Yeah.
In one season. Do you remember when we did
No.
a little stat analysis of Checo's career, and we kind of did the Racing Point and all the way through, and we kind of showed how he'd almost been like a perfect wingman because he'd always brought home the bacon. He hadn't won all the races, but he was always doing enough to keep the constructors ticking over, and we were kind of celebrating him then getting second, which is probably the best he could have achieved because he's in the car alongside Max. So when we were saying that, what he needs to be doing because he's got the machinery that can deliver that, and he's done it. He's secured second. Well done, Checo. Oh my God, in 1 year. I'm not sure. Have we ever seen a driver fall off a cliff in terms of world championship performance from just one season to the next?
I don't think so.
I don't know. I'm sure somebody could let us know, but
yeah, I don't know how you would build that stat. Car changes.
No. Let's say same car.
Right.
This is the same team.
But what if the car got worse, but the other guy's still champion? It's not like Valtteri went second behind Lewis to 8th.
That's what I mean. And I'm sure somebody would tell us
I'm just saying the stat you're looking for probably doesn't exist.
I'm sure I bet Sean Kelly would know it. You don't know it, but I bet Sean would.
100% Sean Kelly would have some for us. He knew the year that people are born. I think Sebastian Vettel was born this date at this time in this hospital in this part of Germany. And he was right. And then he Googled it. He goes, yeah, I got that one right. Well, that guy's awesome.
Oh, man.
All right.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to next week. There is a rumor circulating from my neighbor Jim, who's been on DRS, that we may be looking to try to make a Vegas themed night of it by having the guys all get together for a game of poker and then segue into watching the race because that'll at least keep us awake for the 1 a.m. race. But and how badly I lose at poker and how much I drink on the way to losing in poker as to whether I actually get to see the race, I guess.
I'll be watching with a handful of friends, and I'm. All right, Rob. Any other closing thoughts before we for Vegas?
None whatsoever.
All right. Well, with that, I just want to say thanks for listening this week. Sean, thanks for coming on. We hope everyone enjoyed that comment. We did. The F1 circus is an amazing kind and a part of it to let people have people letting out. So anyway, with that, getting ready for Vegas. Talk to you in 1 week's time, everybody.